Third time's the charm.
Oh my God. I'm going to start like with oh my God,
Yes.
pun intended,
Yeah.
because this is the third time we're trying to start this conversation. The first time light went, the second time I forgot to press the record button. And here we are trying to have a conversation. Badi intelligent sound kari thi, haan?
Yeah,
Meri
we
badi
were
achhi.
having great conversation.
We're having
just
great
People can't
conversation.
hear it anymore.
And here we are. So hi,
Hello.
Madiha creator.
I'm Sarmadik Bahar. I'm a lawyer and a journalist.
Nice. And we're trying to have a conversation on spirituality and rationalism and trying to determine whether they are friends or foes.
Yes.
If I go back to how I began off earlier, it's going to sound so dakyanusi.
Yeah.
Because मैं दो दफा वो try कर चुकी हूँ वही words and now they're not even sounding
It's
real,
gonna
so
sound
I'm not
forced.
going to.
Yeah, we're gonna
I'm not going to start
go off
that
the
way.
books.
अच्छा हाँ, go off. मेरे पास नहीं थी पहले भी कोई किताब. So I will just I will look for a different train track in my mind. Okay. So when I think of, I'll start from what matters. Okay. So when I think of spirituality and rationalism, I think of them as tiny little boxes. And each box has a label to it and it's separate from each other. So we have God, we have ourself, we have our private selves and public selves and our relationships and our public personas and our parent personas and our CEO personas in all different boxes. And the function of all of these boxes is to keep life efficient. It's a beautifully designed system. Okay, it's a beautiful program. It makes you productive. It's efficient. It gives you an illusion of control. It keeps us in our place. Does it make us happy though? Does it keep us happy? So because what we realize is that the more every time we put something in a box, there is a separation that we're creating between those boxes. And it's almost as if we're not allowed to bring those boxes to other boxes tea party. So, God must never be brought into politics. Your public persona must never be brought into your private persona. You even have different wardrobes for it, right? Your private life or your relationships should not be brought into the workspace because that's professionalism. And so all of these divisions have happened as a result of us being super organized and super labelly with our lives, and yet we're not happy. And the question that comes to my mind when I think of all of these boxes and where I started off from was ke, agar, if we've put all of these little pieces of our lives in different boxes, then who is the one who's actually putting these things in those boxes?
It's us.
Right. And so I feel like, so the act of putting things in boxes is the mind. And then there's a program behind the program that gets us to label and divide and keep ourselves separate. And yet nobody is happy. So where it's productive, it's not equal to happiness. And so more and more, the reason why I come, and that's the rational part of us, right? Putting things in boxes is equal to, for me, and again, this is my point of view, for me is equal to rationalism, being a rationalist. Because as I was trying to have this conversation earlier, because that means that the mind, whose entire sole function is to problem solve, is trying very hard and is succeeding beautifully in keeping things separate so that they don't overlap. There are not a lot of complications. And yet we are in the most complicated time of our lives, right? As a race, as people at a personal level as well. So how do we, and so rationalism for me seeks to divide. It seeks to put things in their place. It seeks to keep things separate from each other and make sure they all fit. But because I have not fit into any of these boxes, and I borrow a little from each of them, and not just together also, it depends on the timeline of my life. And I've been so many different people at different times in my life, right? So because I am that person who seeks to borrow from different boxes and put together my own like a curated subscription box, which borrows from all of these themes and yet is completely unique. So what would I call that beautifully curated, unique subscription box? And then who is curating those pieces for me? Okay. Because if I were to only approach it from a rational perspective, then I'm very well trained to also label and maybe tie ribbons around those boxes. But there's a part of me that seeks to have her own box, which is actually not even a box. It's like a beautiful energy field, which has symbols of these boxes inside, whatever. So who is that part of me, the bigger part of me, the non-boxed part of me, the outside part of me, the program behind the program? And that for me is spirituality. It carries a heavy kind of weight with it because it has a lot of baggage attached to it, as do many other words also. But I feel if I were to summarize, rationality are boxes, and spirituality seeks to free ourselves from those labels and from those boxes, and come to a place where it's not tagged, it's not labeled, where all those boxes can exist together with open parts of those boxes. They can all exist together. And yet there's something also, it's still not equal to the sum of its parts. There's more. When you bring it to that space, then there's a bigger space. And that's the program behind the program behind the program. And that's for me is spirituality. So that's my perspective.
Okay.
What's yours?
Let me start by saying that while rationality to a certain extent does try to categorize things and put them into different boxes, its complete field doesn't say that we must divorce ourselves from what it means to actually live a life. And to live a life, you can't define certain things into specific categories. The lived experience is very different from what rationality aims to do. So that categorization where we say that rationality prevents you from taking a holistic view of things is not something I go by. I feel like rationality leads you down. These are two different ways of thinking, and we will move on to doing a very rational thing is defining our terms before we begin speaking about them. So for me, how I define rationality would be a belief that all observations and facts are determinable, and that truth is determinable by human intellect, by human observation, by experimentation. And although we might not be at a place where we know everything, and we might never be at a place where we will know everything, but slowly but surely we will get there, and that is to be trusted. And the only thing to be trusted is something that we can determine through scientific experimentation, through the scientific method, and something that we can prove to ourselves. And that is rationality. Rationality says that these things are to be believed, other things are not to be believed. If I were to define spirituality in a similar way, it would be a belief or a system of beliefs. And I would really like your input on this because you have greater experience in this field than I do, is a system of beliefs that guides the human lived experience rather than the domain of fact and knowledge. It says it gives you a rationale of where you are. It gives you a personal narrative that you can hold on to, and it is something that then guides your life throughout all of it. So this is how I would separate these two.
Spoken like a true rationalist.
Yes.
Because again, you have divided both rationalism and spirituality into two different boxes.
We did that when we gave a title to this podcast. These are two separate ways of thinking.
Are they though? Because so to your thing on using these definitions, how I would look at both rationalism, rationalism, and spirituality is that if I were to borrow from a rationalist mind, there's a linear approach. There's spirituality begins the journey, and rationality or rationalism determines it and brings it to being. So I go back to the light beam experiment. By Einstein. So how he determined the theory of relativity was at the age of 16, or how his journey began. He did not determine how his journey began, is that he imagined himself riding on a light beam, almost like a broomstick. That's Einstein. And from that point on, what he understood or tried to get at was that the observer's point of view, who's riding the light beam, is that the same point of view as the observer who's looking at that person riding the light beam from Earth, for example. And that came to an entire theory of relativity. It depends on where you are to be able to... your point of view as an observer determines your reality. That's the theory of relativity, right? Your point of view as an observer determines your reality.
Yes.
In a simplified way.
Yes, in a simplified way.
In a simplified way. So if I were to reframe spirituality as imagination, because spirituality is a heavy word.
Yeah.
So if I were to make it a little bit lighter and like tie bows around it, imagination.
Yeah.
So imagination sparks the idea, the interest, the curiosity, the journey. And the first step as to which path to follow and how to make that idea or spark come to being is the power of rationality.
Yeah.
Because, and that's why I talk about the program or the force behind the mind, which inevitably is the heart or the soul. But if we take out the heart and the soul part of it completely, and we for 1 second say suspend our belief systems, and I think it's a theatrical term also, right? The suspension of belief.
Suspension of disbelief.
Of disbelief, sorry. It's suspension of disbelief. Yeah, suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like you're in a cocoon where anything is possible.
True.
So if we get into that theatrical mode for 1 second, and we suppose that we're in a pod, an airspace, whatever pod, and there is we have the master force, which will guide or which will tell you where you want to go next. You're not in that pod with a game plan, but it's going to tell you where you're going to go. And then you have your controls, your motherboard, with the actual mechanisms, the actual determinants that's going to, and the coordinates and all that's going to help you get there. So the suspension of disbelief is equal to the fact that you know that you want to be on a journey, you want to go somewhere, but you don't have a plan. You don't know how, because your mind or your rationalist mind will tell you a finite number of ways to get there, because that's what it's learned or that's what it's observed. Okay, because it borrows its theme from the observable universe. So every time you want to do something new, how do you do it?
So rationality is, people view it as this black and white world, this bureaucrat sitting in an office, and this is right, this is wrong, and there is no imagination there. He wears the same tie to work every day. It's not that. Rationality doesn't say that we can't imagine things. It doesn't say that we can't create narratives for ourselves, stories for ourselves. And it doesn't say that these stories don't have the power to inspire us or to change us, or it even in certain ways says that these stories are necessary because they are the only things that guide us in certain scenarios. It doesn't say these things are not possible. It takes you to a certain point and says after that you might need a narrative that you
I had a
create for
specific
yourself.
question.
Yes.
Because you have your brain's designed differently from mine. So how does a rationalist's brain what's the first thing that the rationalist's brain does when it wants to do something that's never been done before? Where would it go?
Imagination. Yeah.
Imagination. So there is a force that's not observable right now. Because you, like how you translated rationalism or rationality was the fact that it's of the observable universe, right? Which can be determined.
Imagination falls under that as well. It's
so how is imagination observable? Like in your view,
just like any other brain process is observable. There is an interaction between different neurons, different chemicals that drive all brain functions.
But in this case,
yes,
your imagination is not being able to, like, you can't project your imagination onto a screen. You can't track it. There's no post-campaign report analysis for your imagination. There's no, like, how are you observing your imagination?
It goes to what consciousness really is. Consciousness is our brain doing all these functions, and then almost like an image of that brain functions being portrayed in front of us.
But right now, the only person who can observe it is you.
Yeah.
Right? And when you say observe, it requires an object and a subject.
Yes.
A subject and an object.
Yes,
right.
It does.
So who are you viewing? What are you viewing when you yourself are the observer and the subject?
I'm viewing my brain functions. My consciousness is a collection of all these brain functions, all these chemical reactions that happen every day. Many of them are observable. If you put me in an MRI while I'm doing different activities, different part of my brains will be of my brain. There are two halves of it, but different part of my brain will be activated.
That's another conversation for another podcast. Yes. Who are you, Sarma? Which planet do you come from? And what do you want from us?
I have one brain.
You only have one brain. Okay.
So different part of my brain will be activated if I upset the chemical balance of my brain by consuming different chemicals.
That's the result, though. So the only way neuro pathways fire themselves is when it's been given a stimulus.
Yes.
Right? There's a stimuli is equal to neuro pathways firing. So you can catch the neuro pathways firing. That's the result. What is the stimulation?
The stimulation, it's a very old question of the brain being the observer and the brain also being the one who's doing all these functions. And that's a duality that we have to work with.
So there's an observer inside you.
No, I feel that the processes of the brain are being simultaneously observed by the brain itself. So,
So I'm just trying to become a visual person. So help me, na. So there's a brain.
Yes.
And there's a processing part. There's the minion part of the brain.
Yes.
And then there is a master part of the brain.
Yes.
Is that like how your brain is?
Yes. Okay. If you want to imagine it, let's see. The brain is carrying out all these functions, and then all of them combined together, you can see in what your consciousness is, that voice inside your head, that long train of thought that you can't get rid of. That is the end result of all of that. And one part of your brain is observing that. That is your consciousness.
So what is consciousness for a rationalist?
Consciousness is just that, the brain observing itself work.
So where does the consciousness get its information from?
From the rest of the senses, the eyes, the nose, everything else.
So you're saying that the conscious part of the consciousness for a rationalist would get its information from the observable universe.
Yes.
And so, but then that means no rationalist has ever actually been an innovator, because the observable universe is not going to, all the breakthroughs in science, all the breakthroughs of scientists, all the different composers who've come and toppled over the way music should be played, did not get that stimulation from the observable universe. So if their consciousness, and forget spirituality right now, completely throw it out, huh?
Yeah.
So if the consciousness only gets its information from the observable universe, that means there would absolutely be no innovation ever happening.
But inspiration and innovation and imagination are also brain functions. The ape saw this little piece of rock and thought that it's sharp enough, maybe I could do something with it. And he saw that the sharp edges could cut, and eventually he used that as a tool. And then eventually he turned it into a spear, and eventually into a sword. So that is also brain function. We are designed, our brain is, the best thing it does, a human or a primate brain, is it recognizes patterns. That's why we look at the sky. That's how we did all our scientific development, because we recognize patterns and we try to make conclusions out of that. So we are geared towards that. We are geared towards recognizing patterns. And it's part of our brain function to then think how this can be improved, if there are elements of it that we haven't looked into it. So inspiration and imagination and breakthroughs are also just the brain doing the activity that it is designed to do and then coming to those conclusions. So I feel like that it is built into it and it's a part of it.
So if I were to call that conscious part of your brain, and I'm personalizing it right now. So if I were to call the conscious part of your brain for 1 second, the intelligent one, who my only differentiated perspective would be, okay, it's not borrowing from the observable universe. It is in fact downloading information that your minion brain does not have access to. And that consciousness, in fact, is connected to or it's borrowing its information from the biggest, the most holistic consciousness force that ever existed. And it's downloading the information and translating it to the minion brain. Would that make sense to you as a rationalist?
As a rationalist, the only thing that makes sense to me is peer-reviewed journals.
No.
And
Okay.
if any hypothesis is backed up by experimentation across variables.
But I'm talking about you in your personal life. Would that make sense to you?
As a person, I feel that while my conscious brain tries to do things and interact with itself, there is a limbic part of me, a more primal part of me that has existed for millenniums. That's the same system that's in me, that's inside other animals. And that limbic system perceives the world in different terms. It
Okay.
perceives it in terms of threat, and do I have to respond to that threat?
But that's the primal brain.
Yeah, so I feel
So
like
is that the one that innovates also?
no, I'm not talking about innovation. I'm talking about any other reactions. I'm talking about emotional reactions. I'm talking about physical primal
So
reactions.
safety, yeah.
Yeah, things that you can't say that your rational brain decided, things that happened by themselves. For example, something happened and now you're angry. If you see a threat and your body squares up, that
So
is,
those are primal functions.
those are primal functions. So I feel that the things that can be described as us interacting with a larger force can also be described as the primal part of our brain making these decisions for
But I
us.
was actually talking about, so that part of it is clear. When I say the minion brain, I actually am not trying to disparage it in any way.
Yes.
I'm trying to give it a function.
Yeah.
So the function would be your safety, like the Maslow's hierarchy, whatever that
the
pyramid.
pyramid, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to give it. So it's intelligent in keeping us safe and providing us food, safety, shelter. Then it has the emotional needs that it's sort of built up. Then it has emotional reactions. All of those are a part of the functional brain. I'm saying when it comes to innovation, ideation, imagination, the master brain that is that was the original question, that that you were saying there's a master brain, the subconscious unconscious part of it, which is not the primate part. The primate part of it, all of it is this part, the minion part, right? But this master brain, is there a possibility in the rationalist's mind that this master brain is connected to, that master brain in fact is not solely yours, it's the master energy field, and one part of it is connected to your primate, your functional brain?
Of course, it's possible if
If it's
yes, if we prove it and if we
for
observe
you,
it.
because we're not scientists, so we're not like here to like defend our theory and the
For
thesis.
me, I take a very dismal view of how,
like it personally for you.
yeah, a very hard, cold look at how things are, and because our discussion is getting a little metaphysical, so I would like to bring it
Back to your personal stuff. Absolutely.
bring it back to the real world where our listeners can actually connect with them as well.
Listeners.
Yes. Multiple.
Oh God.
So, the thing is, how I view this whole discussion and this debate is that when humans gained consciousness for the first time, they were presented with this vast open world that they had no idea about. This magical ball of sunlight would come up and it would make the crops grow, and then sometimes it would rain, and sometimes it would rain so much that everybody would drown. So how do we make sense of these things? So we made sense of these things the only way we knew how,
Right.
which was contextualizing all of this in terms of our relationships that we have with other animals, other human beings, things that we experience. So we gave the sun a father's figure, we gave the earth a mother's figure, and it all developed around those themes as well. So that is a spiritualist way of looking at things. They were trying to explain what's happening, and they connected themselves to this vast cosmos because they couldn't understand the cosmos, and they understood it in the terms they knew best.
So what's your personal belief system in all of this? Like, so this part of it I understand.
Yes.
But how does it reflect or tie back to your personal belief system, and how does it translate into your own relationships?
I'm coming to that. So eventually, bit by bit, we started learning about the world, we started learning about the rational method, and we started building this repository of knowledge as we went along. And while we did that, we set aside many superstitions that we had that were hindering us. And at the same time, we also realized that there are certain elements of our brain functions that can't be controlled rationally. So we need a different way of thinking to access them. And I will come to that, and which is the notes that I was making is rationality does not preclude us from different ways of thinking, of holistic ways of thinking, of ascribing to ourselves myths and legends and stories, and finding a way to fit everywhere. It says that, in fact, it may be necessary for us to do that if we are to stay sane. So now coming to my own personal belief system. No, I wouldn't exactly say that's a well-defined system, but let's talk about it in terms
It
of...
works.
Yes, let's talk about it in terms of what people believe. So there is a section of population in the world, a growing section.
I'd really like to talk about what you believe in
Okay.
and how it affects your life.
Okay,
Being
sure.
a rationalist, how does it help you, and how does it define you, and how does it affect your relationships, your perception of self, etc.?
Okay, since we're talking about selves, let me tell you. So, when I was young, some of the things that I used to do with my father is we used to do scientific experiments. For example, we would take a magnifying glass and we would see if we can point and burn things with it. We would take wax, melt it, and try to make figures out of it. We would heat one end of a metal hanger and wait till the heat reaches the other one. So through this process, I learned science, and I learned that these actions are definable and understandable. And in that process, I love those experiments. I still have a microscope that he got for me when I was in 8th grade or 9th grade, and I just spent the summer looking at all sorts of things, putting it on there. In the same vein, he taught me logic. He said that if somebody were to say to you that I can bring a big lorry inside this room, what would you say to him? And I said, that's not possible because the door is too small. I was tiny back then. And he was like, good, you're using logical reasoning. So that's how I grew up. I grew up in this environment where, and of course, as a result, I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be the first one on Mars. But
Drat.
that ship has sailed. Elon Musk will
And
get
that
there
ship
first.
literally has sailed
Yeah. So
skyward.
yes, so that's where we are.
I was curious as to how being a rationalist, because I know how being a spiritualist has helped me and enabled me to be a better version of myself.
That
So
I can
I am interested in knowing how a rationalist uses rationality in defining moments, in big emotional moments. So my question to you is, your discipline of working with the observable universe, how has that helped you in any of your big emotional moments or in your tower moments in your life,
Okay.
in dealing with life?
Of course. The first and the most important, which all of the rationalists will agree with me, is that it allows you to sift through what is real and what isn't. It allows you to sift through superstition and reality.
Like how? Give me an example. Like for you personally, like just bring it to life for me now.
Okay. For example, if somebody says that
No, something that's happened to you, like anything where you have actually, I'm interested in how you've used these tools to bring them to life in your real life. So not hypothetically, in your real life.
Okay, let's say, so one very common belief that spiritualists share is karma. That if you do good things will happen to you, and if you do bad things will happen to you. And as a rationalist, I observe the world and I'm like, that's not necessarily true. Yes, if you are a good person, then people are more likely to do good things for you, and if you're a bad person, the same would happen. But there is no correlation between that, because I see evil people thriving. And
how did that translate into your personal life?
I'm coming to that, but let me set the context for it. I see evil people thriving, and I see good people suffering endlessly, and their life goes on. So if somebody was to tell me, and they have, that if you're going through this suffering, go on, don't fight back, be good, and you will be eventually, life will turn itself around for you, I can rationally say that I don't find any correlation between that. And me not fighting back or me not doing all of these things will not yield me any results. And the person who is committing injustice will continue to thrive. Therefore, I will take the actions which will stop this from happening in the real world and the now. So I'm not satisfied with the promise of future revenge and retrieval from cosmic force. Rather, I will take actions into my own hand. So that's how I apply it to myself. And that's how it has applied to me in multiple scenarios. For example, other things, that if I'm angry, let's say for one thing or another, I lash out, I'm angry. I wouldn't say, which a lot of people do, that, oh, I'm an Aries or a Sagittarius or XYZ, which is why this is the person I'm supposed to be. This is who I am. I would rather realize that my brain has a defense mechanism that gets triggered when certain conditions are met, then I will look at, is this a good thing for me? Is this be conducive to my life? And if I decide that it isn't, then I will rationally realize that I can do certain things to change those behaviors, and I can change myself. I can change my mind. This is not who I am because I was born on a certain day when the planets were in a certain way.
So what you're saying is actually equal to spirituality. So what does the spiritual practice? That's exactly what spirituality is. That's exactly what it is. So what it says is, there is nobody else responsible, nobody and no thing. So I'm breaking nothing down to no thing also. So nobody and no thing who is responsible or which is responsible for a moment that you're going through in your life. Nobody and nothing is. There is no astrological part. There is no external force that has the power to act upon you. Okay? And you yourself is the only person responsible, and you yourself have the power to change it. Nobody else does.
Yeah.
And what it also invites you to do is conduct a thorough research in your own past actions, in your own learned responses, in your own learned behaviors, to see what you can do differently, to see how you can change it, to show up for the same emotional moment in your life differently, which is equal to different reactions. So that's exactly what the spiritual practice is. And I feel maybe that's why the word spiritual it comes with a lot of baggage.
It does.
Because it's been spoken of perhaps, or being decoded by so many different people with perspectives which are not real. Because if I were to summarize spirituality and the practice of spirituality, because spirituality is not a principle, it's not a theory, it's a practice. It's a practical thing. So so spirituality in one sentence is, nobody else is responsible for you but you. You want to change yourself. Change your behaviors. But change yourself does not mean change yourself in a theoretical way. Change your behaviors, change your responses, change your belief system. Just change yourself. So spirituality is a practice. Real spirituality is a practice, which is only goal. So why are we doing this practice is to be better than who you were yesterday.
Yeah.
That's it. So that's what spirituality is.
I agree. That's a great perspective to have. And in the ways that I agree with it, it is, for example, astrology is making a great revival. People are reading it left, right, and center. CoStar, which my friends made me download, is one of the fastest growing, and I think the biggest app out there. It's an app. It makes your star chart, and it gives all this information to you and about who you are in certain behavioral ways. Now, the founder of that website, I saw her interview once, and her perspective on this, when confronted with the fact that you are essentially the one message that is sent out to one person is also procedurally generated and sent out to so many other people, so how can you say that what you're saying is right? Her answer to that was that nowhere do I say that what I'm doing is absolutely accurate. Instead, these are points for introspection. You use these as cues to introspect into yourself. So for example, if your astrology says that you're predisposed towards being a doormat for other people, then you introspect and you see if that's actually happening in your life and if you want to change that. So insofar as that is concerned, that spiritual practices force you to introspect, that is great. That is perfect, because not everybody has the ability to introspect that deeply into themselves. People don't think about themselves all that much. And so any external force that helps them do that is good. That's great. So I support that completely. I feel like as far as that is concerned, that is good.
तो फिर different तो रहा ही नहीं ना, rationality and spirituality.
There is difference here.
What is it?
The difference is that it is very easy for these practices to slip into dogma. So while we can, and I agree with all practices that aim to make you a better person, that aim to make you a more well-rounded individual, that force you to introspect, these forces then can have bad influences as well, such as creating in-groups and out-groups. For example, this is a very banal example. Two people meet at a party and they're like, oh, you're a Sagittarius, my best friend is Sagittarius, let's hang out, let's be friends. and they then have a great friendship just because of this thing. It's not that's not a problem. That's a good thing, right? But similarly, if some people meet at a work environment, they're like, oh, you're a XYZ, I probably won't get along with you, and then we have sort of created an exclusionary group based on these practices. So then it slipped into sort of a dogma, not something that's helping you introspect, but
So that's
something
a
that is
perspective
creating
on
groups. So that's where I have my gripes with spirituality sometimes.
But that has actually nothing to do with either spirituality or being a rationalist.
yes,
that
I'm not
has to
saying-
do with people.
Yeah, exactly. I'm
And
saying-
how people are, and in fact, the entire purpose of spirituality is to make people aware of the eyes with which they view the world, or the lens with which they view the world. And to fault or to say that the onus of this lens lies on any discipline is not right,
Yeah.
because the lens that you pick up, for example, if you're a photographer and you want to take a picture of a mountain, the lens that you pick up is up to you.
Yeah.
Nobody else is determining
Exactly.
that lens. You are,
Yes.
right? So, however, the kind of output that's going to it'll result in is because you picked up that lens to take that picture. So, different people, whether it's astrology or tarots or spirituality or religion, these in themselves are innate. Like, they're harmless. They're like they have zero frequency. They're just things. The lens that we pick up to view them through is what gives them that meaning. And so what spirituality invites you to do is pick up a lens that is a less divisive, like ideally non-divisive,
Yeah.
holistic, inclusive, compassionate lens.
Yeah.
सो देन तो फिर ये बाकी आउटसाइड वर्ल्ड पे आप जैसे भी देखोगे, बिकॉज आपने लेंस वो वाला उठाया हुआ है, तो द वर्ल्ड विल ऑटोमेटिकली, द पिक्चर दैट यू विल ऑटोमेटिकली मोल्ड इटसेल्फ टू द लेंस दैट यू पिक्ड अप टू टेक दैट पिक्चर थ्रू. सो देन चाहे आप रैशनैलिटी की बात करो या स्पिरिचुअलिटी की बात करो, दोनों कह रहे हैं कि लेंस वो वाला उठाओ. If when it comes to self-development or becoming a better version of yourself, lens wo wala uthao that serves you the best,
Yeah.
right? And serves you the best at a primal level, which is the rationalist mind. Like, make sure that you're safe, you're protected, make sure that your responses are contextual to the environment that you live for a long time. So that, or the fact that you have better responses, you're more emotionally stable, you have more long-lasting relationships, whatever it is. So that's a spiritualist's objective.
Yes.
तो दोनों coexist करते हैं, क्योंकि दोनों का objective ये है कि वो लेंस ऐसा उठाओ जिससे आपकी outside ज़िंदगी जो है और दुनिया जो है वो ऐसी दिखे that is pleasing to you.
Yeah, that's where I was going to come to next, which is that rationality is a point of view, but taken to its extreme, people do not have what it takes to live at that edge. That edge being, you recognize that all these random events have led to where you are right now, and essentially there is a lack of divine meaning that you can determine with things. A lot of people have reached there. Many rational thinkers, writers, scientists have come there. So the question then is that you're gazing into an abyss of nothingness. There is no meaning there. And it scares many people. And they can't live a life that has no meaning. They can't really live a life which they know will end eventually, and it will turn into nothingness, a void, again, dust. They can't really do that. So then they either run back to where they came from, which is whatever belief they were brought up with, whether it's any religion or anything else. Or if there are reasons that they have exited that framework of thinking, let's say you're in a oppressive Pashtun household that is under the yoke of the Taliban government, and now you're living in a super oppressive society, and you've escaped from that and you don't want to go back there. So then, but they still feel that they can't exist with just a void, then they run towards other methods of belief, and where this modern spiritualist movement comes in. So Firstly, that is the process that happens for many people. Either they don't live on the edge and they go back, or if they don't want to go back, then they adopt these new methods of thinking. Now, for the people who are on the edge and who have completely given themselves over, the good things are they will reject all existing notions. There is no reason why they should believe any of that. And that leads to perhaps the most innovative thinking there is. So the rationalist thinkers of the early 20th century, the 19th century, they were instrumental in saying that just because the king says something has to happen a certain way, or just because conservatism says a thing has to happen a certain way, isn't necessarily so. Use your own mind and take it wherever you have to go. So that's great. What happens there is a complete rejection of held notions, and that allows you to think things for themselves. But many people there suffer on a human level, on what principles to live your life by, how to conduct it all, why show up for work if you're all going to die at the end of the day. And that's seen very well in the most popular existentialist writers, Albert Camus and Sartre. I will never be able to pronounce that name properly. Their protagonists in their novels, such as Nausea or The Stranger, when you read those, you will feel that there's something missing, something on how they interact with the world. They're very rational.
And what happens at the end of The Stranger?
Well, he dies, of course. Yeah.
Doesn't just die.
He's executed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in Nausea as well, he's just living his life, but there is this unease that you can sense out through all the novel. So that happens because...
And what happens when that happens?
When that happens, you either become a nihilist, who's like, the world doesn't matter at all, and nothing does. So
or
either I'll kill myself, or I'll kill other people and then kill myself, and all these other options if the life isn't treating you properly. Or you become an extreme hedonist where you're like, I'm just going to live for pleasure every single day, and that's the only thing that makes sense to me.
So I have a question from a friend of mine.
Yes.
Because I was talking to her, I was like, oh, this is the podcast we're going to be doing. She's like, oh, ask your guest this question. It's like, if you're drowning or you're falling off a cliff, who are you going to call out to? And I said, he's probably going to call 911.
Yeah, anybody who can save me, anybody who's nearby.
The emergency.
Yeah.
But, like, really?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, whatever I'm going to scream.
So in a life-threatening situation where the end is actually not near, it's here, you're going to call the emergency hotline.
Yeah, it has the better chances of saving me, historically speaking.
Okay.
So I would just scream help and see who answers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you hoping for an answer? You're going to scream help, so you're not going to call anybody?
No, I'm just going to scream help if I'm dying, if I'm drowning or falling off a cliff. I'm going to scream help because that's the most probable way of me receiving.
And do you believe
help.
you're going to get an answer, like a reply?
If there's somebody nearby, yes.
If nobody's
nearby, I'm going to die. If nobody's in earshot, then I'm going to die, and that's fine.
Okay.
That happens every day. I could die on my way back from work. It's okay.
Okay.
Get in a car crash. Anyway, so back to where we are.
I don't know where that is.
We are where an extreme rationalist faces an existential crisis.
Have you faced it?
Of
you
course.
Understand what this podcast is about,
yes,
right?
Yes,
this is all about personalizing theories, personalizing everything that we've learned, applying it to our personal life. I keep bringing you back, and I feel like there's a barrier here.
No, I will.
I keep bringing you back to how has that, you being a rationalist, how is that translated into your own personal life? Because that is what theories we can read in books, we can YouTube videos, we have articles, we have podcasts, other podcasts, not this one.
Yes.
So theoretically everything is perfect or imperfect, but I want to see how it's worked out for you. So have you been at a point where you've been brought to an extreme place where you have had to choose between one extreme or the other?
I wouldn't say I've been at an extreme place, but I have reached an existential crisis of sorts, which many people reach, where you come to the realization that I will have to create meaning myself, that nobody else can give me meaning.
And if I may, how did that come about, this existential crisis? Was it a moment? Was it like, what was it?
Not really. It's
so one day you just woke up and you're saying, I'm having an existential crisis.
Not even that. It's just the whole realization. You always have this knowledge at the back of your head when you believe in rational thinking, that their meaning has to be created by you and you alone. So when you're confronted with possibilities where you can take an action that has no meaning, so you have to do that for yourself. So that is where I feel there is a rational way of approaching spirituality.
What was your rational way of approaching spirituality?
My rational way,
because you were just sharing or about to
Yes,
share.
yes.
I'm trying to get you to share
I'm going to share it.
what
Don't
happened
worry.
with
I'm
the
not gonna-
existential crisis
Yes.
that you had. When was that?
A couple of years ago,
Okay.
while working. So what I did was I placed myself, and this is what I'm going to say, is
Can you help us understand the context a little bit? Like, what was that brought about? Like, how was that brought about? Was it, as I said, was it a moment, or was it just you showed up at work one day you did not like? What was the external trigger there's to which the response was, oh, I'm having an existential crisis?
It wasn't anything like that.
Okay.
That it wasn't like a one breakthrough moment. I'm like, oh, I'm
Okay,
having
okay.
an existential crisis. All throughout, since growing up, I've never been a particularly spiritualist or a religious person. Not to say that I don't believe in a religion, I do, but I wasn't involved in all those practices. So I've always held this belief that it's essentially the things and actions that are happening here that will matter at the end of the day. And then at one point, you come to the realization that, okay, I cannot go to work today and nothing will matter. I can just randomly tilt my car to the side and it can hit this pedestrian, and it's just chance that all these things are happening. So then how do you make sense of it? How do you keep going forward? How do you keep working on yourself when you realize all these things are possible? So that's when I came to the conclusion that you still have to make myths about yourself. You still have to make stories and narratives about yourself that will place you in a certain way, because at the end of the day, the human lived experience is slightly different from the rational way of explaining the world.
So what is the story that you made for yourself?
I placed myself in the long line of humanity, and I said that I am just one particle in it, and I am responsible for pushing the needle of human development and human prosperity one step forward, whatever way I can.
Okay.
I placed myself in a larger cause, and that cause defines my life.
So what was the first step that you took in your personal space towards this cause? And I do mean the first step. I'm not saying the first mountain that you climb, but the first step that you...
I think I've always been doing that. I just created the narrative around it. I'm a journalist and a lawyer. My whole naive way of thinking early on in this career was that I'm going to change the world, I'm going to make things better. Even when I wanted to be a scientist, all I wanted to do was make new things, take human progress forward. I read a lot of science fiction, and there's a lot of imagined worlds by these science fiction writers on how the world would turn out thousands of years from now. So I place myself in that long line, and then I consider that all my actions are then feeding towards that, and it
Feeding towards?
human development,
Human development.
human prosperity,
Development or prosperity?
both
or
of them.
Both of
The
them.
human race, and it can be minuscule, it can be nothing at all, or it can be massive. But that is the myth, and that is the long story that I place myself within as a rationalist. And
So if I were to ask you towards the end of this conversation, if I were to ask you, as a rationalist, summarize your life purpose, please.
yes,
Why do you exist in one line? What would it be? Or two? Doesn't matter, 2 lines.
there's no reason why I exist. There's no reason why I exist. It's all chance.
Okay.
It's all game, and it's a chance that I was born, and I take everything like that, with that heavy realization that it doesn't really matter. But now that I'm here, I have to do something, and to do something with my life, I will devote myself to knowledge, gaining it, disseminating it, understanding it, and through my actions help the human race in my own tiny ways. And while I'm doing that, I'll have a lot of fun, make fun memories, climb mountains, do all of that stuff. So that's how I have to deal with it as a rationalist. Because
Okay. Thank
if you
you.
don't, otherwise it's just the abyss that you're looking down, and that's never good.
So let me thank you for summarizing the rationalist perspective on life and what you bring to the beautiful world that we're living. So as a spiritualist, for the lack of a better term, I would summarize my perspective as the fact that I am the most beautiful being that was ever created.
Mhm.
And in my beingness, I have a million other beautiful people, events, moments, instances that I'm interacting with, and I'm creating also. So there is my beingness, and there are other people's 8 billion beings. So I have a beautiful I am a beautiful universe. I'm interacting with 8 billion other universes. The more beautiful I make my universe or my lens with which I'm viewing the 8 billion other universes, the more beautiful those will begin. So the lens with which this observer observes the world matters.
Yes.
And the lens that I choose to pick up for myself. And that for me is the reason why I exist. The lens that I choose to pick up for myself is that of the fact that there is beauty, there's magic, and we are bigger than our brains and our minds, and our hearts have infinite potential of infinite galaxies. And that's what we bring.
Let me tell you, I do that as well.
Super.
Yes, I rationally also agree that the power of self-affirmation, the power of meditation, the power of creating narratives surrounding yourself, the power of...
That was, by the way, supposed to be my closing line.
Oh,
so.
oh, sure. I'm going to give a closing line and hijack your show. Is that you can approach all of these, and they help you become a better person. And there is inexplicable, irrational things that you will do as a human. You will fall in love. You will make...
Oh, irrational thing
Yeah,
of falling in love.
you will make
Okay.
infinite sacrifices for that other person and feel inexplicable things. And then if you want to live your life that way, you can meditate, you can train your mind, you can affirm your own beliefs, and you can affirm your empathy for other people and your love for other people, and that will make you a better person. The brain, at the end of the day, is just like any other muscle. You train it to focus on these things, and it will become that.
Cool. So I think both the rationalists and the spiritualists agree that we are here to make ourselves, or to be the best versions of ourselves.
Yes.
However, whichever road we take
Yes.
is on us, but at the end of it, it's just being better versions of ourselves. So
That
thank
is
you for
true.
being here.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. This is the most cold conversation
I know.
I've had, because
was no
there are so
real-
many barriers to you, Salma. I'm going to have a second conversation with you.
Yes,
some
I
other
will.
time.
I will have that one as well.
Because you brought all your barriers, like you